To get the most out of this video, listen to the introduction to understand what is going to happen astrologically this week and when it will occur. Then use the timestamps in the description box or comments section below to go to your sun, moon, and rising signs to see how things will generally affect you. This is a general read of the astrological energies that will be playing out this week. For a specific assessment of how the planetary energies will affect you personally, I would suggest getting a reading with a professional astrologer. You can do so with me through the Guiding Star Astrology website. If you're new to astrology, you are so welcome on this platform. If you would like to learn to read your own astrology chart, you can do a short, fun course with me for $35 Australian. The link is in the description below. Thank you to all my YouTube subscribers and my Patreon family members. Without you, this video and its message would not be possible. Hello, I'm Kesenya, and welcome to this series that I've been preparing for you all about Neptune and Neptune's transits through every house in the horoscope and how it will affect your life. Now, I've been wanting to do this series for quite some time now. However, I decided I'd wait until Neptune had crossed my ascendant and my first house lord. In doing so, there's a strategy behind this. I wanted to see how Neptune would play out in my life on those very significant and key points in my chart. Astrology is 50% reading books and doing courses and getting mentors and teachers, and the other 50% is observation and experience of the planets in your life. So the older you get, the more wisdom, the more knowledge that you will have about how planets impact us. So now that I've gone through those particular transits of Neptune in my first house, I feel that I'm ready to talk more in depth about this very watery planet. So let's start by having a look at what Neptune is all about astronomically. So Neptune comes after Uranus in the order of the planets. We have Mercury, Venus, the Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, boom, Neptune. Second to last of the key players in astrology. Pluto is still considered to be a planet of influence in astrological circles, and therefore Neptune is the second last. Now, when Neptune was discovered, it wasn't through observation. They didn't sort of spot Neptune in the sky and go, aha, there it is, because you actually need a telescope to see Neptune. It's not something you can observe with the naked eye. And so Neptune was discovered through mathematics. Basically, the astrologers of the time when Neptune was discovered, and we're going to talk about that when Neptune was discovered in just a minute, but the astrologers of the time were observing Uranus, and they had mathematically predicted where Uranus was going to go according to all their observations, and then Uranus did his usual quirky thing and did not follow the predicted orbit. And so from that, they were able to calculate that there must be a planet further out that's pulling on Neptune, and its gravitational force has caused it to move in a different way than we expected or anticipated. And so because of their mathematical calculations, they began to look for another planet beyond Uranus. And voila, we have Neptune. Now, what is very interesting, and this is quite telling about the character of Neptune actually as well, what is very interesting is that Galileo had observed Neptune back in 1612. He didn't realize that Neptune was a planet. I don't know what he thought it was, but he didn't sort of put two and two together and think, there's another planet out there. So Galileo had observed Neptune, and this was a whole 234 years before the discovery of Neptune. Now, why I say this correlates to sort of the ambiguous nature of Neptune is that he's a bit slippery as a planet. It's hard to sort of pin down. So here was Galileo observing Neptune, not realizing what he was, not sort of seeing it for what it was, basically sort of under an illusion that Neptune was something else. That is a very Neptunian quality, which we'll talk about very soon. But 234 years later, we had the discovery of Neptune in the real through that mathematical observation that I was talking about. This was in 1846. Now, most people know that when we discover new planets, there is often a rise in consciousness or an increase in conscious awareness in humanity on the Earth at the time of the discovery of a new planet. For example, when Uranus was discovered, we had a number of revolutions occurring around the world. What does Uranus correlate to? It correlates to freedom, liberation, equality, and equal distribution of resources. And what were these revolutions about all around the world? Well, namely, the French Revolution was occurring when Uranus was discovered. And that was about no more let them eat cake kind of stuff, no more of the aristocracy living in opulent luxury beyond compare, while the poor people of the land went hungry and could barely clothe and feed themselves. And of course, Uranus, sorry to diverge off Neptune, but Uranus is all about those things, equality. And so the conscious awareness of the planet had reached a point where it was like, no, now hang on, we're not going to take this inequality anymore. We want things to be fairer. We want things to be more even. And lo and behold, at the discovery of Uranus, which rules those things, the consciousness was ripe and ready to embrace that as part of its awareness. Now, the same occurs with Neptune, who was discovered a little while after, as I said, in 1846. So what was the expansion of consciousness that occurred at the time Neptune was discovered? Well, we had an invention of photography that had occurred sort of 20 years before. Now, when we're talking about these big planetary discoveries, this is no mediocre discovery. This is really kick-ass stuff. And so we look at the surrounding sort of, 20, 30 years as an era of the discovery of Neptune. Keep in mind, when I'm talking about this, that up until the discovery of Uranus in the late 1700s, there had the existence of planets beyond what you could see with the naked eye was not known, was not proven. And so for thousands of years, the consciousness of humanity had been in a state where it was only aware of what it could see, touch, taste, hear, and smell. In the real, in the earthly dimension. If you couldn't see beyond Saturn, then there were no planets beyond Saturn. And then all of a sudden, at the discovery of Uranus, boom, we have an awareness of more. And so Uranus was discovered, and then Neptune was discovered. And so the surrounding sort of 30 odd years in the vicinity of 1846 when Neptune was discovered are Neptunian times. And so we look at what was unfolding in consciousness then. And as I just said a moment ago, photography. Photography was discovered. Neptune rules photography. Motion pictures were discovered 30 years or so after the discovery of Neptune. And Neptune rules motion pictures. The spiritualist movements were unfolding around the world. We started to find people who were interested in sort of hypnosis and mesmerism, people who would be, looking at channeling, people who wanted to conduct seances. These sorts of things started to come into vogue as parlor games, as did the tarot card readings and even astrological readings as sort of, like I said, parlor games, entertainment at fancy people's dinner parties and so on. That was the very glamorous side of Neptunian times, using those spiritualist things as entertainments for glamorous people. Plastics were discovered around this time. Braille for the blind, writing for the blind. Antiseptics. Pasteurization was discovered and started to be used. And these are just a few of the advancements that occurred in society around the time that Neptune was discovered. We also had cultural movements like Romanticism, the poets, Byron and Shelley around this time as well. We had, alongside Byron and Shelley, we had things like the Frankenstein novel or the Dracula novel, which is a very interesting thing. Impressionism was also the painting style en vogue around this era of history. And we also had the Communist Manifesto that was written. Now, some people, if you're not familiar with politics, the name communism can conjure up all sorts of negative imagery in your head. But the idea behind communism was a bit like Uranus in that it was about equality and compassion to everybody. So these are combinations of both Uranian themes, which is equality, and sort of an even playing field for everybody. And also Neptune, which is highly compassionate, wanting everybody to get an opportunity. And of course, Neptune, for those who we haven't got to this point yet, but Neptune rules idealism as well. So the ideal of the Communist Manifesto was present in these Neptunian times as well. Whether it actually functioned and worked was another matter, but the ideal was there. A utopian vision for society is what Neptune is all about, and so there's no surprise that we had movements in that direction towards that ideal at this time. Back to the astronomy, Neptune is a planet that's made up of liquid and ice. And it's also full of different gases as well. So it's quite a combination, Neptune, of many things. But it's very similar in its size and its structure to its nearest planet, which is Uranus. They're almost twin-like in many senses, even though they function very differently astrologically. Like Uranus, Neptune is actually circled by some very faint rings of dust. Uranus's rings are more visible, but Neptune does have rings as well. Very light, very faint rings around Neptune. If you've seen images of Neptune that were taken, I think it was by the Voyager space probe. I may be wrong there, but if memory serves me, I think it was Voyager that took images of Neptune. You'll know that it's this beautiful, serene, blue-looking planet that has some wafting sort of white, they look like clouds, around it occasionally. And despite its very serene-looking surface, it is quite a wild planet underneath. So again, that illusionary factor there. On the surface, it looks like it's cool, calm, collected, and underneath, it's not what it seems. On Neptune, winds whip around the planet at, I have to read this, 2,100 kilometers an hour, and they're furious winds. Not only that, Neptune takes only 16 hours to do a rotation. It's heaps bigger than Earth, Neptune, lots bigger than Earth. And we take 24 hours as an Earth to rotate. But if you're a monstrous sized planet and you're spinning, doing a circuit of 16 hours, then the gravitational pull of Neptune becomes pretty phenomenal, despite the fact that you're mostly made up of gas. So this momentum of the gravitational force from the spin and the winds that whip around Neptune sort of whips up all the ice, methane, hydrogen, helium, and ammonia. Had to read that list to make sure I got the chemicals right. Whips it all up into a big slushy mess. So it's not this pure ethereal kind of atmosphere or body of Neptune. It's actually a bit of a slushy, wild mess when you get down to it. Now, some scientists, and this is very interesting, some scientists have hypothesized, just through their calculations and observations, that the core of Neptune, which is burning iron, very fiery, very hot core, they have hypothesized that there is a layer of diamond, liquid diamond, that encircles the core of Neptune. Now, just how they've reached that conclusion, don't ask me, but it is there in scientific journals that this is a hypothesis that could prove true and correct. Now, this iron core that's burning hot, white hot iron core, is actually bigger than the Earth. So the core, the solid mass, if you like, of Neptune is larger than the Earth, and it burns at about, or its temperature is about 5,000 degrees Celsius. So it's incredibly hot, even though it's so far from the sun and distant from the sun's rays, which is usually where heat comes from in the solar system. This Neptune has its own heat source through this burning iron core. So you're getting the picture? We have this impression of Neptune, of serenity on the outside astronomically, but not quite what it seems deep down. And again, we'll see that represented when we start talking about the astrology of Neptune and how it impacts us, and therefore how it's going to impact us when it travels through each house. We also can see that it is a very fluid type planet. It's, slushy, slippery, and of course Neptune rules the watery depths of the ocean, if you're familiar with mythology and the title of Neptune. We'll talk about that in just a second as well. I love the analogy that we're seeing here of this watery fluid planet, but it has a solidness at the core and a preciousness, the liquid diamond. There's something precious at the core of Neptune. Now, Neptune, as we've already stated, is invisible. You cannot see Neptune out on a fine stargazing night. You will always need a telescope to see Neptune. And as the old Hermetic principle goes, as above, so below. The way things appear in the sky from our vantage point on Earth is exactly how they will play out and be represented and reflected in our lives on the planet. What does that mean? Well, it means that the planets we can see with the naked eye, the visible planets, in astrology, they correlate and connect to what we experience visibly, tangibly, experientially on the Earth. Our touch, taste, sight, sound, and smell. You know, the physical things of the experience of being a body incarnate on the Earth connect to visible planets and what they rule. When you get to Neptune, actually when you get to Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, they're all invisible without a telescope, and therefore they connect to the inner realm of the psyche, what motivates us unconsciously, you know, our behavioral patterns, our things we can't help about ourselves, you know, our deep psychological wounds and our karmas that we carry with us at the core of our self, at our soul level. They correspond to these invisible planets because as above, so below. We can't see them, therefore it's like the part of the iceberg that sits underneath the water. You can't see it, but it's still there packing a whopping punch, especially if you happen to be on the Titanic. So Neptune has at least 14 moons that circle it. It has a greater and denser gravity than the Earth. So if you're standing on Neptune, you will weigh a lot more than you do on the Earth. And it takes longer than one lifetime for Neptune to circle the sun. It takes 165 years. So in your lifetime, you will never see Neptune return to its natal place in your astrological chart. You just won't live that long, at least not in this day and age as I'm recording this video. Who knows what science might do in the future, but right now you won't live to be 165 and see Neptune come back to its natal position. Let's explore Neptune mythologically now. Well, Neptune is the name of the Roman god of the sea. Not only the sea though, in the oceans, but also of freshwater. Neptune was the Roman god of freshwater as well. And we often see Neptune in mythological pictorial representation with his trident. And of course, what is the symbol of Neptune astrologically? It's a trident. So there we go. There's so much correlation between the mythologies and what plays out in the skies again here. So again, there's no coincidences that when the astronomers discovered Neptune, they didn't know that it was made mostly of liquid and gas. They didn't know it was mostly a fluid planet. But lo and behold, here we are. They gave it the name Neptune, king of the oceans, and Neptune is quite an oceanic planet with its liquid mass. Once again, this is showing us how the conscious awareness works, even in unconscious ways. Now, a little bit more about Neptune mythologically was that he was the son of the Titan god Saturn. Now, along with Neptune, there was Jupiter and there was Pluto that were the sons of Saturn. And Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto didn't really get along with Saturn very well. If you're familiar with the mythology of Saturn and Jupiter, you'll know that the mother of Jupiter hid him away because Saturn had a habit of eating his children lest they rise up against him and take over. So theoretically, in the mythology, Neptune and Pluto were gobbled up by their father Saturn. But then along came Jupiter when he was all grown up to the rescue, and Saturn regurgitated his offspring, Neptune and Pluto. There were others as well, but the main ones were Neptune and Pluto, the brothers of Jupiter. And together, Jupiter, Neptune and Pluto overthrew their father Saturn, and Jupiter became king of the gods. And we had the reign of the Olympian gods from that point on, which include Neptune and Pluto. So Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto are the Olympian gods. Saturn was the Titan god. And Uranus, who was the father of Saturn, just to confuse matters even further, was not a Titan and not an Olympian. He was sort of one of the forefathers of them all. In ancient Greece and Rome, they celebrated the role of water in their lives, and they had a festival to celebrate this, and it was known as Neptunalia. There was also another festival that occurred at the similar time called Ferinalia. I won't go into the mythology of that name, but they were both celebrated around the same time. So July 23rd and July 25th, the role of water and the preciousness of water in life was celebrated with these festivals. So Neptunalia, it was a time of honoring the god Neptune and its watery association. So let's take a peek at the astrology of Neptune. I'm going to tell you all about Neptune astrologically. What is Neptune about? Well, as we've already come across, Neptune is about illusion, seeing something and actually realizing it's something else. It's not what it seems. So that can be a number of things can be displayed that way. Glamour is ruled by Neptune, because if you're glamorous, you've got amazing makeup and hair and beautiful, shimmering, gorgeous clothes and stuff. You look very glamorous, but is that who you really are? When you wake up in bed in the morning, and your hair's a tousled mess and you haven't got makeup on and you're wearing your baggy old t-shirt, you might not look glamorous. So glamour is ruled by Neptune because it's part of that deception, if you like, but not a bad deception. It's just a deception. It's not what it seems. Neptune, in that sense, rules glamour. Neptune, as we've already discussed, rules a desire to return to utopia, to achieve utopia, to create heaven on earth, so to speak. So that can be a very positive thing if we're wanting to make the world a better place. And Neptune is also quite a compassionate planet. There is a lot of unconditional love that goes along with Neptune, brotherly love, the idea of anyone can be saved from their horrible life or, their difficulties or their own ill choices in life. Neptune has this sort of unconditional love. Some might refer to that as this redeemer quality about it. And Neptune can be connected to miracles as well, because if somebody is raised up from the muck and mire into a wonderful life, well, that is often seen as a miracle. And that transformation that occurs is a very Neptunian associated thing in astrology. Part of this desire for utopia can actually have connections to a longing to escape the horror and the harshness of earthly reality. And those of us who are very Neptunian, who have a strong Neptune in our chart, or even a strong 12th house or a strong Pisces, will know what this is all about. The wanting to escape from earth and earth realities because they're too hard to bear. They're fearful. Earth is a fearful place for these highly sensitive Neptunian, Piscean, 12th house souls, and it's almost too hard. So Neptune is also associated with tremendous longing to tap out, to escape, a longing to go to heaven. Now, you'll see a lot of religious groups, fanatical religious groups going down this road where it doesn't matter what I endure in this lifetime, I will be rewarded when I go to heaven. And that's all they're living for. They don't even engage in earthly reality and earthly life because it's only about heaven and getting to heaven after this horrible life is over. That's a Neptunian thing. Also, Neptune has this idea about it of wanting to return to the watery depths, i.e. the womb, being in the embryonic fluid, being safe and secure, not having to sort of struggle and make it on our own because, hey, we've got everything we need. We're warm, we're safe, we're fed, we're in the womb. And Neptune has this desire for that too. So it's a dual desire for paradise, heaven, but also at the same time a desire to, return to the safety and security of home, so to speak. Neptune can also give a longing to be saved. You want your hero to come along and rescue you from this, terrible existence. That's a Neptunian longing. But also, if we find that we desire to be the rescuer, we want to be somebody's hero, that's a Neptunian thing as well. So there's often a spiritual connection with Neptune, and I'm sure from what I've just described, you can see connections in religious circles to savior mentality, redeemer qualities, longing for paradise. You can see where Neptune's getting its sort of shadow side of spirituality popping up there in religious, ideology. But Neptune is also in the positive side which I love to talk about more, is the beautiful connection to angelic realms, to the divine. So if we channel higher wisdom, higher knowledge, that's a Neptune thing. If we're channeling creativity, beauty, art, if we're channeling unconditional love. And now I'm talking about channeling here, not in the sort of, some entity speaking through me, although that is a Neptunian thing. I'm talking about simply expressing things that come from beyond us. Beautiful things, gracious things, ethereal things, things that come from beyond the earthly plane. That spiritual side of Neptune is so beautiful. So Neptune is the manifestation of divine love, divine grace, and divine creativity, divine creative ideals. He is connected to visualization, imagination, and even healing through visualization and imagination. The idea that through your thought processes and lifting them to a higher plane, dreaming and aspiring of what it could be, that you can heal yourself. And again, we come back to the miraculous component here, where people are miraculously healed. Neptune has connections to hypnosis as well, and mesmerism. In fact, Mesmer was the man who developed the idea of being hypnotized as a form of healing. So the two are very similar. And so Neptune has connections with this as well. It's all very interesting, but Neptune is actually a planet that it's hard to define him, and I use the word him loosely, as a masculine planet. Now, Neptune as a god was a masculine god, but the expression of Neptune is actually very feminine. It errs on the feminine side. So it would be very interesting to understand exactly how they reached the concept in ancient mythology that Neptune, the god of the oceans, was actually a man. I feel maybe that came about at the time of the ancient Greeks and Romans, when the patriarchy was establishing itself, because really the expression of Neptune is this compassionate, unconditionally loving, highly creative energy, which connects more to the water signs and the watery energy, which is feminine in astrology. So very interesting there. Neptune is a more feminine energy expression. Neptune rules the sign of Pisces in modern astrology, and of course that is a water sign as well. Neptune is also in astrology neither benefic nor malefic. So that means, we don't put a label of good or bad on him. But really with Neptune, it depends what aspects you have to your placement of Neptune in the chart, whether he will manifest his shadow side or whether he will manifest his light side in your life. And we've kind of talked a little bit about both here now. I will talk further about the shadow side in just a second. But if you have mostly good aspects, like a conjunction, we can classify that as a good aspect, or perhaps a trine or a sextile to Neptune from other planets, then it's looking good for you. Neptune will tend to express in its more angelic form. It's more miraculous, blessed form. But if you have quite a mixed bag, maybe you've got some squares to your Neptune, maybe you've got some oppositions to your Neptune. If that's what it's looking like, then you may end up with a bit more of the shadow side exhibiting in your personality or what you attract in your life. Let's explore what that is all about. Well, some of the shadow side of Neptune is in the desire for utopia. We want to see evil people punished. And you'll see this a lot expressing in religions, where we just want everyone who's bad to go to hell. And that's actually a shadow Neptunian energy, because we want to preserve utopia for the pure, and everyone else can suffer, So that's a shadow side expression of Neptune. Narcissism can be connected with Neptune's shadow side as well. And so can masochism, actually. If we think about this desire to be seen as holy and pure, often that connects to making ourselves falsely humble and lower than another person. And that can incite in another person distaste, and disgust for another person who is falsely humble. And of course, if you're familiar with the idea of masochism, then you know that it's about debasing yourself in order that you might feel more worthy or more holy because you've made yourself lowly. It's a very slippery, shall we say, concept. And again, not everything is as it seems. It might seem with someone who is in a masochist state that they don't care about themselves, that they don't love themselves, that they're being cruel to themselves. But very often under the surface is this energy of wanting, the best way I can describe it, to be pure through making yourself lowly, like the flagellants did in ancient medieval times through whipping themselves. Oh, they're so pure and holy because they're whipping themselves for Christ. It's that kind of idea. Odd one, but not everything is as it seems with Neptune and Neptune's shadow side. Projection is something that is actually a Neptunian behavioral quality coming from this psychological depth. If we have separation anxiety, that's a shadow side of Neptune. Of course it is, because we are longing to return to the womb. And when we're separate from that safe space, separation anxiety. So if you're looking at those psychological issues in a chart and, assessing that, look at Neptune and what Neptune's doing in the chart. Shadow side of Neptune can be idealization, where we don't see a person clearly for who they are, but we put them on a pedestal. So celebrity culture would be one expression of that. Anyone we put on a pedestal and hold up there, and we create an illusion around that person. It's not the truth. It's not real. It's not what is really going on at the core of a person, to have them up on a pedestal and think that, oh my God, they're so perfect. That's idealization, and that's Neptune shadow side, as is hysteria, as is addiction. Addiction's another expression here. And why? Because addiction is escapism. If we're addicted to drugs, usually with Neptune involved, it's because we want to get away from the harshness of reality. If we're addicted to alcohol, again, it's an escape mechanism and it's an escape valve, but not a healthy one, because reality is too harsh and we just long to get out of here. Obviously, deception is a shadow side of Neptune, because if you're creating an illusion, while there can be sort of times when that's good, as in the case of glamour and that's fun and what have you, sometimes when we are creating an illusion, we're deceiving others. We're pulling the wool over their eyes. We're not being our true self, and that is a shadow Neptune expression. Sacrifice, I would say, is a shadow Neptunian expression. Again, it comes in close context with this false humility kind of behavior. If we feel that we have to sacrifice ourselves for another person, then we're kind of making ourselves to be better than the other person. I'll go in, I'll sacrifice myself, and then that person will be saved. And there's a false humility about it, a deceptive humility that goes along with that. And of course, oftentimes when people have strong Neptune representations in the chart, they lose themselves, they martyr themselves for the sake of another. Does that benefit their life? No, usually. But it might make them feel spiritually greater, or that they have been a noble person. Again, we've got this sacrifice energy that's a bit not what it seems, and this is also the shadow side of Neptune. Victimization. Victimization is another Neptunian energy, where poor me, I am suffering because life has been unkind, and therefore I am longing to get away from life, and return to the womb or go to paradise because I have been victimized. Instead of being our own savior, instead of making the best of things and doing what we can to transform our karma, no, we're a victim and we just want to escape. That's so Neptunian shadow side. Especially, you could call it suffering that's seen as purity. So these are some of the Neptunian shadow energies. I don't want to leave it on that though. There are good things, obviously, that Neptune correlates to. We've talked about some of these, but, others might be the belief that there is enough for everybody, and that the universe can be kind and the universe has our back. In fact, transcendence of matter is a very big Neptunian theme. The belief that eventually good will win over evil. That's Neptunian as well. Jesus' teachings were very Neptunian. He was, after all, the avatar for the age of Pisces, which was ruled by Neptune. So compassion, unconditional love. We've talked about that. Forgiveness, healing, all these things, divine healing, miraculous healing. These are Neptunian ruled things. So Jesus was a big representation of Neptune energy in the positive. The most creative and artistic planet, we've already talked about that. And it's actually at its strongest capacity in water signs. So Neptune does very well in Pisces, Cancer, or Scorpio. She will tend to give the best results if that's where he is in your natal chart, but also if that's where he's transiting at any given time, he's going to give the better side of himself to you. Neptune rules the color light blue. Hence, I have my blue blouse on here today for this video, but I've also worn my very well, you might not be able to see it because the color in this camera doesn't actually come up that good. I need to get a new camera, but it's actually a very beautiful velvet jacket that's ocean color, like the kind of tranquil turquoise that we see up on the beaches of Queensland or some beautiful tropical beaches. And I thought, seeing as Neptune rules these gorgeous oceans, I would wear my beautiful aqua turquoise color velvet jacket with my light blue Neptunian top. Neptune can also have connections to lavender, purpley colors also. Hence, we see often people who work in spiritual, sort of new agey fields have a lot of purple going on, because often they might not be aware of this even, but they're probably highly Neptunian people. They have a strong Neptune in their chart, and so the purple element tends to come through quite a lot, and you'll see a lot of, websites and stuff with purple this and lavender that on many spiritual sites. Neptune rules the gemstone amethyst as well, and so amethyst has a lot of qualities to it that correlate very strongly to Neptune. Some tangible things, and I did say in the beginning Neptune's more psychological. Yep, that's true, very true, but Neptune does have some governance of certain items on the planet, namely because of what was happening at the time Neptune was discovered, what things were starting to be used and utilized when Neptune was discovered, and therefore Neptune gets the rulership of those things. So the ocean, obviously, but oils, plastics, impressionism, film, photography, advertising, poisons, escapism, that's not actually a tangible thing, but that's obviously something Neptune rules, drugs. As I've already illustrated, a lot of these things were being discovered. Film, photography, medications, the shipping industry, steam-powered ships were really starting to get a Guernsey around the time that Neptune came along. So shipping and the oceans, all of these things, highly Neptunian. Now, in my level 1 astrology course that is coming out, you can learn more about Neptune and the things Neptune rules, and we go into greater depth with Neptune there and its rulerships. So if you're interested in knowing more, check out that course. But what does Neptune want? It wants unwavering trust, unwavering love, an unwavering belief that the divine will come through for you. Even in the face of no evidence at all, Neptune wants us to believe. If you are 40 odd years old and you've never had a boyfriend, Neptune is saying, keep believing and the miracle can happen. And I would encourage you, if that's the case, well, wait till you're 42. Who knows? Neptune, when it reaches its maturation at 42, may just bring you what you've been waiting for. So that's a short look at the beautiful and quite intriguing and unusual planet of Neptune. Now let's have a look at what Neptune is all about when he travels through a house in the horoscope and what he's going to do for you while he's there. So how do we find out which house of our horoscope that Neptune is currently transiting through? Well, I would suggest going to an app such as planetwatcher.com, which is a great tool for just finding out where planets are currently at any given point in time. Look for the trident symbol, which is the glyph of Neptune, and see what sign it's falling in. Once you know that, then you can figure out what house in your horoscope Neptune is transiting through. And for this example, we're going to be looking at Neptune. We're going to use Neptune in Pisces as our example. If Neptune is currently transiting through Pisces, and we want to know if we're having a transit of Neptune to the 9th house, well, in this example, Cancer would need to be the rising sign, and I will explain to you, for those who don't know, how this works. If Cancer is the rising sign, all we have to do is count 9 houses to find out if Neptune's in the 9th house. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 puts Neptune in Pisces in the 9th house. So go to your rising sign, count how many houses to where Neptune currently is, and then you'll know what video of Neptune through the houses you should be watching for your current circumstances. But this video is all about Neptune in the 9th. Well, Neptune transits through a single sign for roughly, give or take a little bit, 14 years at a time. If you have Neptune in the 9th house, you're going to be focused on Neptune themes tying in with 9th house themes. And 9th house themes are all about expanding the heart, the soul, the mind, the intellect. It's about beliefs, it's about faith, it's about cultural connections with others. It's about inspirational figures and being inspired in general and finding your Dharma. It's a Dharma house, and in my opinion, the most important of the Dharma houses. So here is Neptune. What's it going to bring us? Well, Neptune is a planet of inspiration, and in the 9th house of inspiration, we're going to feel inspired, but inspired to expand, because Neptune is no boundaries. And in the 9th house, it's all about growing our awareness through experience, through understanding and through adventures and gaining knowledge. So we're going to find that our boundaries regarding those things just blow right out with Neptune in the 9th. We feel inspired to expand ourselves, basically. We might discover that we have a powerful sense of devotion to a belief or an ideal at this time. Now, this could happen insidiously because Neptune is not sudden firecracker kind of events. Neptune is slow creeping fog in the way it moves through our lives. And so you may find that over this 14-year period, you discover a belief that you devote yourself to, or some ideology that becomes, ingrained in your soul. This is the higher expression of Neptune in the 9th, of course. Sometimes we find that people get involved in idealistic religious practices as well, for better or worse, but there is that devotion and idealization of beliefs when Neptune is in the 9th. People might idealize a certain philosophy or a philosopher, or somebody who is an inspirational figure might become idealized. And we might idealize as well the gifts of having higher knowledge and higher wisdom and higher understanding. Neptune, as we know, is longing. And here in the 9th house, we have an innate longing for ultimate truth, for higher understanding, to see the big picture of life. And we long to be able to grasp this and understand this. And that can lead us on many adventures when Neptune is in the 9th, as we seek to fulfill that longing for understanding. What we're looking for with Neptune in the 9th is a philosophy that transcends our ordinary thinking and our ordinary mindset. We want to go beyond that. Neptune is to go beyond the everyday mundane things. We want a philosophy of life and a meaning and a purpose for living that is greater than what we see around us every day. Now, to do that, sometimes people let go of sort of their rational self. They let go of sort of logic and, as I said, rationality in order to try to find the ultimate truth and this higher consciousness. They let go of rationality to try and understand the meaning of life. Like, it may not seem rational to take a spiritual journey through the Andes. But that's what people might do during this particular 14-year period. They go seeking some higher purpose, higher meaning, and they might leave their logical, ordinary, everyday government job to go and spend a year trekking through the Andes. And that's a Neptune in the 9th house type thing, a spiritual quest that we want to undertake in order to embrace a higher understanding of life. And we leave rational logic behind, the mundane, everyday, ordinary things, must get a job, must pay the mortgage off, must raise the children. And we kind of blow that to the wind under Neptune in the 9th house transit. So, of course, with no boundaries in the house of belief and religion, we find that we're very open to new philosophies, new beliefs, new religious practices, and maybe cultural ideas as well. Hence, going to another country is done for the purpose. If we go to another country, we go for the purposes of expanding our heart and soul and mind and understanding. We might even align with or get on board with some other cultural religious practice that is not our mainstream, home-based religious practice or spiritual practice. One example might be, aligning with the shamans of Peru, or getting on board with their ideology, or the Tibetan Buddhists or something like that. If you're from a Western country, this would be non-mainstream for you, and that would be the kind of thing Neptune might be leading you to in the 9th house. Very open to new doctrines and new systems of belief. Now, if you are already a very spiritually oriented person, and I'm assuming if you're watching this video, you probably are, you're looking for spirit in things. And when we are that kind of person in our makeup natally, this transit of Neptune to the 9th can actually take you to levels of bliss that you've never known before through spiritual practice. So if you are that way inclined and you're having this transit, expect that at some point in this 14-year period, you will reach new heights of joy, which don't we all crave and long for? How wonderful. Some people, particularly people with a sort of a psychic bent in their chart, will actually have very prophetic experiences. They will get a sense of things going to happen before they actually happen. They will perceive things as sort of like psychic downloads from the divine, and will potentially be given the gift of prophecy for this 14-year period, which could be very exciting if that's something that you enjoy. And of course, we get a broader understanding of life simply because Neptune removes boundaries to that understanding. And suddenly things make sense. Not that Neptune is about clarity, he's not. It's quite the opposite, actually. But because Neptune is in the house of understanding the meaning of life, and Neptune is no boundaries, we have no boundaries to actually embracing the bigger picture, the larger meaning of life. Let's explore the religion and belief side of Neptune in the 9th house just a little further. A lot of people under this transit will go off and become some sort of, join some spiritual group, or have a spiritual experience that leads them to join a religious movement of some description. You might become a disciple of some guru, some spiritual leader potentially. Your prayers are effective. With Neptune in the 9th, your prayers will be heard, they will be answered. You even have a sense of knowingness that the divine is on your side. The divine is hearing your requests and your petitions that you put forward in prayer. The divine is mingling with you in your meditations and your spiritual practices. In fact, you're going to be more drawn to praying. If you've never prayed in your life, you might find that you start doing that now. If you've never meditated in your life, under Neptune in the 9th house transit, you might start doing that as well. You're drawn into more contemplative endeavors when Neptune is in the 9th house. If you have other worldly experiences with God during this 14-year transit, those spiritual heights are going to remain with you the rest of your life and will color your attitudes towards faith and belief for the rest of your life. And this is simply because you will feel close to God, and that energy of feeling close to the divine will remain with you. How beautiful. But not everything is beautiful with Neptune. Remember, it has a shadow side like everything in the horoscope. And here in the 9th house, we could be deceived by gurus and people who we look up to and respect. The inspirational figures in our life may deceive us. And we can recount many such incidents of cult leaders and even spiritual gurus and what have you that have led people astray and disappointed people and sort of destroyed a certain part of their soul through the loss of faith and the disillusionment that comes with a deceptive guru. Now, your natal Neptune will usually give an indication of how you're going to experience the 9th house Neptune transit. If you have only hard aspects to your natal Neptune, then be aware of this shadow side that I'm talking about. If your Neptune has only good aspects, and if you're familiar with astro.com, that would indicate only blue lines, or solar fire, only blue lines to your Neptune, then you will have the heights, the beauty of this Neptune transit to experience. So if you've got a mix of both, then expect to have a mix of both shadow and light effects in your life for the next 14 years. Let's explore a few more of the sort of shadow side. It is possible with Neptune in the 9th that you might start to exhibit spiritual arrogance. And we all know what that looks like. People who are zealots, who cannot be dissuaded from their particular point of view, and they think that they must bash people over the head until they come alongside their particular belief system. That's one of the dangers of Neptune, is this zealousness for a faith or a belief that could be very dangerous. We might find that, like in this shadow side, that we tend to judge others harshly who don't think like we do about a certain faith or belief or spiritual practice, and we become extremists. And yeah, need I go on? Neptune is to be gullible, and we can also have gullibility with different sects, different cults, different systems of belief, because our discrimination tends to be lacking with Neptune sometimes in the shadow expression. So be very wary of that as well, being duped into joining some cult or what have you. We experience God either as love with Neptune in the ninth, and pure love, higher love, unconditional love. We can experience Neptune that way. But the shadow side is we may experience God as the avenger, because Neptune has this duality to it, where it's the divine savior and it's also the judgmental God on the throne with the white hair flowing and thunderbolts raining down on humanity. Often we see people with particularly strong Neptunes in religious cults where they are living for paradise. We've talked about that already. Living for paradise to come and showering down condemnation on everybody else, you know? And this is the shadow expression of Neptune in the ninth house, where we experience God as going to be our judgment, our not judging us, but judging everybody around us and avenging us. God will shower down his vengeance. And in fact, if we don't toe the line, we'll receive God's vengeance as well. So another shadow mental construct that can come up with Neptune transiting the ninth. Coupled with this, interestingly enough, in the shadow expression is a loss of ethics, a loss of courtesy, a loss of respect for the intelligence and the rights and the boundaries of other people. The right of another person to have a belief of their own, to choose for themselves what their belief is based on their life experience and their understanding of God. And we lose respect for that, or we lose courtesy for allowing people to have their own minds and their own decisions about their faith. And that's where we start to see, like, you know, Bible bashers and, you know, big sort of terrorist zealots and that kind of thing coming out of this transit. So you can see there's quite a different contrast between shadow and light here. Heightened spiritual experience versus extremism that is very negative. So forewarned is forearmed. Watch yourself, detach and observe how you are experiencing this Neptune transit. And remember that whatever happens, it will usually be infiltrating rather than an explosion of an event. So you might slowly but infiltratingly join a cult, or you might slowly infiltratingly get on the board the zealous bandwagon with some extremist view. You might slowly infiltratingly experience the love of God and the heights of unconditional love more and more. You might slowly and infiltratingly discover spiritual truths that transform your life. So I hope you see how this belief system in the ninth house is affected by Neptune. Let's look at some other things. Higher learning is a ninth house thing as well. With Neptune here, we have unrestricted thinking. You know, we're not confined to a certain ideology or thought pattern or whatever. We have broad thinking, big thinking, like, and during this Neptune transit, we might be able to comprehend philosophical ideas that we have never grasped before, because our thinking is expanded through Neptune, and we are intellectually open to anything new. We're boundaryless with knowledge. So Neptune is not a logical planet. Let's face facts here. It's not about logic or the mental processes of the mind, but Neptune removes the boundaries that we have to our understanding. So I'll just reiterate that. Now, also the ninth house is traveling and other cultures. If you are traveling overseas, going on your spiritual quest, your spiritual journey with Neptune in the ninth, then I want to encourage you to be very wary of gullibility with strangers in other countries or being deceived by foreigners, because that is a shadow expression of Neptune. When you travel, Neptune is foreign places. Ninth house is other cultures. Neptune is also deception. So do be wary of that if you're going to travel. I'm not saying don't travel. In fact, you probably will under this transit at some point in the 14-year period. But be conscious as you do. If you do travel, you'll travel for the purposes of learning or spiritual growth. Now, of course, during this 14-year period, you might have a transit of Saturn through your ninth house at the same time, potentially, or Jupiter or another planet that gives you the impetus to travel for other reasons besides spiritual growth and empowerment. You might travel for business, you might travel for work, you might travel for family matters, whatever. But Neptune, if you do any big journeys during this time, in this 14-year period, there will be a spiritual growth component to your travels. Even if you're going for work, even if you're going for family matters or whatever, spiritual growth and expansion of the mind and the soul and the heart will occur through travel. Travel during this time can even be a form of escape, running away from something. You know, your family life sucks and you just decide to pack your bags and go to Chile or something, and you just run away. Escaping through travel can be a thing. For better or worse, that's a shadow or light kind of component. It can be, you might find that it's really good to go escape. But maybe you leave a family and a mortgage and a what have you at home, and you're running away from your responsibilities, and that's perhaps not such a good thing. Travel can also provide some sort of salvation as well. You've had a crappy job that you've hated for years and you've been miserable and getting more and more depressed, and you decide, I need a break, and you go and take Route 66 from one end of America to the other, and you find you can breathe again. It's your salvation to have been on this quest, and you might get a whole new perspective on life through a travel experience that takes you in a whole brand new direction. So there is this salvation element that comes through travel and escape element that comes through travel, for good or for better or worse. And finally, one thing that can happen during Neptune's transit of the ninth house is that we may visit idealistic destinations. Maybe you've always wanted to see the Champs-Élysées, or perhaps visit the Amalfi Coast, something I would love to do. And there's this idealization of destinations that we have that is potentially able to be fulfilled during Neptune's transit of the ninth. You've always wanted to visit South Africa, so you go to South Africa at some stage during this 14-year transit. But be warned, if you're going to some place that you've idealized in your mind for whatever reason as being beautiful or cultural or whatever, be warned that when you get there, sometimes our illusions about how romantic or beautiful or exquisite these places are can be shattered. We feel that we've been duped or deceived. Oh, that's not as nice as I thought it was. Oh, that's far smaller than I thought it would be. Oh, that Egyptian pyramid. Oh my goodness, what a letdown. Can't imagine that. But anyhow, you may feel let down and deceived when you actually get to these idealized destinations. That's the shadow expression of Neptune when we're looking at idealized destinations, but the positive expression of Neptune might be that you get to the pyramids in Egypt, you get to the Sphinx, and it's like magical. You have goosebumps all over your body, tingles. You may even feel like, oh my God, I've been here in a past life, There is that feeling of magic in the air when you get to this idealized place that you've always wanted to visit. So it could go either way, again, probably dependent on the aspects that you've got to your Neptune in the natal chart. But I really love this. The travel to foreign places can bring magic into your life with Neptune transiting through the ninth. So enjoy if you're having this transit, lap up all the good stuff and be conscious about the shadow side, and you will have a wonderful experience with Neptune transiting the ninth house.